What happened in May 1973? The world started, the universe started. Everything else before that was an illusion. May 1973. Although preceded by avant-garde and comedic precedents, modern remixing, a recombination of existing musical components to create a new version, is widely considered to have its roots in the dancehall culture of late 60s, early 70s Jamaica. The fluid evolution of local music that had morphed from ska to rocksteady to reggae was embraced by local music producers who deconstructed tracks into versions suitable for toasting. The local practice of DJs singing or chanting over the top of records at sound system parties, not putting bread in under a grill, obviously. Innovative, that's not in the book either. I'm just elaborating. Innovative producers and engineers like King Tubby and Lee Scratch Perry popularised stripped-down instrumental mixes known as versions of reggae tunes. And at first, they simply dropped off the vocal tracks, but soon more sophisticated effects were created, dropping individual tracks in and out of the mix, isolating repeating hooks, adding various effects like echo, reverberation, and delay. But in May 1973, Lee Scratch Perry, who is undoubtedly the greatest genius of recording of the ever, he remade Leo Graham's News Splash as Station Underground News. And he dropped in a taped sample of the Chi-Lites, For God's Sake, Give More Power to the People, from 1971. This was the earliest known instance of a beat match sample from a different song being used in a recording. By the mid-1970s, dub culture had arrived in the Bronx via Caribbean immigrants such as the Jamaican DJ Kool Herc and Barbados-born Grandmaster Flash. Sound systems were translated into block parties and DJs played soul and funk records in place of reggae. Toasting became rapping and substituted jive talk for patois. In Jamaica, DJs had access to studios for remixing, but in the NYC it had to be done on the fly because the percussive breaks in funk and soul records were generally short. Herc and other DJs used two turntables to extend the breaks. Cutting, which was alternating between duplicate copies of the same record, scratching, manipulating manually, moving the vinyl record between the turntable needle, and these all became part of the emerging culture known as hip-hop. Turntablist techniques, beat matching and all that, developed along with the breaks. And the new medium gave voice to the disenfranchised voice of the low socio-economic demographics, and the culture reflected the political realities of their lives. Caribbean families had settled in the UK since the Windrush stopped in 1948, but the music really started permeating working class areas in the early 60s and found an audience amongst mods and subsequently skinheads and punks. By the 80s, reggae had morphed into jungle, which spawned dubstep, and its cultural impact was that by the 21st century, Caribbean patois was the lingua franca of use of all epidermal patinas. The rapid developments in Jamaican music were arguably attributable to the absence of restrictive legislation. Overseas, white-owned corporate labels had made a racist practice of ignoring local artists, and local record labels had always been liberal when it came to appropriation, themselves lacking the funds or the framework for any kind of litigation. Covers, remakes and versions of popular songs paid no heed to European-derived notions of property, since musical recordings were not copyrightable. Licensing and disputes of ownership usually concern the absence of royalties rather than licensing, and they were not settled in court, but rather in the street with ratchets or firearms or fists. Given the lawlessness of the island, they all had higher priorities than intellectual property and oxymorons like that. And the sufferers' daily struggles gave them profound insight into spurious constructs like this. It wasn't until 1993 that Jamaica's Copyright Act came into effect, and it wasn't until 1996 and when the Jamaica Music Society, which was otherwise known as the Jams, was actually instituted. So there you go.